By way of a personal introduction, Simon, could I ask you to put on that second slide, the one that says a bit of family history? You'll need to listen close to this because the audio is not exactly Dolby standard. Next slide. So what happened that you had to leave Belfast? We're getting the family history.
Right.
Yeah. So this was what, 21, 22?
Aye. At the time, then my mother had a different shop on the Governor Road, the Bunderette.
Yeah.
The Protestant woman come and tell her that they were going to Bunderette to warn her in the shop.
Okay, thanks, Simon. So nobody was hurt?
No.
Right, so that was my uncle, and those of you who think that my accent can sometimes be a wee bit strong, never got to hear me Uncle Charlie. Now, what he was talking about there, that was recorded in 2006, and if you can put me back on the main screen, Simon, that was recorded in about 2006 when he was about 85, and what he was describing there was the reason his family was obliged to leave Belfast. His mother had a shop on a road that runs between the Falls Road and which is Catholic, Republican, and an area called Sandy Row, which is Loyalist. And yeah, at that time, there were significant pogroms. On the paternal side of the family, as you can hear, the family business was burned down. On my mother's side of the family, her father was a docker. And one of the things that happened in the build up to the creation of the Northern State was the expulsion of all the Catholic workers from the docks and the shipyards, plus what were called the rotten prods, which I think as socialists we define as those Protestant workers with a sufficiently high level of class consciousness to reject unionism, reject the imperialist ideology behind it, and the class collaboration behind Orangism. And I think I'm going to be disagreeing quite sharply at several points with what William has just said, and that's a good thing. There's no point discussing people that you agree with all the time. And for example, on the on that fundamental question, Liam, why is it a Protestant Catholic thing? What I would add to William's introduction to that was that when the British settled in Ireland, the bit that held out longest, that offered the most resistance, was what's now called Ulster in the north. And this pacification strategy there was the settlement of small farmers. In the south, it was much more a landed gentry that emerged. Kate Hoey is big pals with them. But what that meant was that a tenant farmer, quite prosperous by Irish standards, developed. And by the late 18th century, these people were influenced, some of these people were influenced by the American Revolution and of course by the French Revolution, and they began mobilizing against control from London. So to use a 20th, 21st century term, the revolutionary vanguard in the late 18th century was a section of the northern Protestant bourgeoisie. They had arisen in alliance with sections of the Catholic peasantry, which was very brutally dealt with. This revolutionary vanguard, as revolutionary vanguards tend to be, was very much a minority. Other loyalist tenant farmers mobilized into what's called the Orange Order. And this is where I would sharply disagree with William. It was expressly set up as a counter-revolutionary formation to smash the Catholic peasantry, to smash that radical Protestant tradition. Now, those tenant farmers, being a bit more affluent, accumulated capital, which means that the Belfast area did begin to industrialize. Flax, linen, that developed into shipbuilding, as William said. And a consequence of the failure of the rebellion was the passing of the Act of Union, which meant that these Irish industries in the north had full access to the common market of the British state, which allowed it to become more prosperous. So with the lifting of trade restrictions, Belfast, within 100 years, from 1800 to 1900, its population exploded massively from 20,000 to 350,000. And as you heard me Uncle Charlie say, well, what he says later in that wee clip is that lots of Catholics from the urban areas, or sorry, from the rural areas, came into the city. Lots of Protestants come in as well. And the essential sectarian geography of the city was established at that point, from the 1820s onwards. And I see my sister-in-law Angela is here. That is starting to change in Belfast. So, areas like South Belfast are now essentially middle-class Catholic areas. The Protestant middle classes haven't moved out. Now, the workforce that was recruited into heavy industry was predominantly Protestant, right? Harland and Wolff, the big shipbuilder, about 7% of its workforce were Catholic in a city where about 25% of the population was Catholic. And one of the things I've been doing for the since lockdown started, if you've been in meetings with me, you'll sometimes see me looking a wee bit distracted. It's because I've been reading the British and Irish papers from 100 years ago this week, and I've been running a wee Twitter thing. But what really strikes you is how militantly sectarian the working class Protestant organizations were, and I'll be coming up with some quotes about that later. And that culminated, of course, in the 1920 expulsions of class-conscious Protestant workers and all the Catholic workers. And this would include people who'd fought in the British Army during the First World War. They had their military medals, and they'd fought at the Somme, Thiepval, and all the rest of it. That service to the empire, which is a huge part of current unionist mythology, was completely disregarded. Now, why is it that the historic province of Ulster, of 9 counties, did not become the state, which is, I've skipped a few slides there. Sam, could you skip on to slide 5? I'm not looking at my own notes closely enough. Right, so, yeah, right. This is what I'm saying about this is from a unionist labour organisation, and you can see, anyway, the slide that I was going to show you there was a clip which says that we don't want Catholics and we don't want Bolshevists, we don't want red flag men. Right. This was very much the ideology. Just pause on that. What you're seeing there that's from the Daily Mirror in 1920. That's the expulsion of Catholic workers and Protestants from the shipyards. You can see that they're being chased by a British Army vehicle and lots of the shipyard workers. So, the state was very much a part of that. Anyway, back to the historic Ulster thing. Slide 5, please, Simon. Yeah, so William Craig went on to become the first Prime Minister. Yeah, I think it was the first Prime Minister. He became Prime Minister of the Northern State. And what he told his audience at one of these meetings was, if we go for the 9 counties, we're going to be outnumbered. If we go for a smaller 6-county state, there'll be 600,000 of us, 300,000 of them. And even though these people are filthy and breed like rabbits, that's going to secure us a permanent majority. As it turns out, one of the side effects of the reactionary family teaching on contraception has been a slightly higher Catholic growth rate. Okay, you can, if you put on slide 6, Simon. Okay, so what happened was in response to the Home Rule movement, which was essentially the SDLP of the time, the Social Democratic and Labour Party, organising, and a mass movement against British imperialism, but in favour of a constitutional nationalist settlement pre-First World War One. Unionists started importing guns from Germany. So a few months before World War One started, Unionists were importing German guns. They were drilling militias, giving them military training. Now, the War of Independence was mostly fought in the south, right? A lot of activity in Dublin, a lot of activity in the Cork area, in Kerry, and so on. Very, well, relatively little, comparatively speaking, in the north. That was partly because of the huge imbalance of forces, because the Unionists had these armed militias. After the end of the war, you had vast numbers of men with military training coming back. You had also a very, very large police force and a strong military presence as well. So the North had become a Unionist armed camp, supplied with state-of-the-art weapons by the British. The resistance in the North was garden shed stuff. It was shotguns stolen from farmers, that type of thing.
Liam, you have 5 minutes left. 5 minutes.
Okay, this is going to be okay. In that case, I'll say something briefly about how the Northern state developed. First election in the Northern state, what we now call Stormont, the Unionists won 40 seats, Sinn Fein and the Nationalists won 6 each. For a period that this hokey cokey of boycott, participate, and that's a pattern that's lasted. But liberal and leftist commentators at the time said that the Northern state had as much in common with Mussolini's England or Mussolini's Italy than a democratic society like England. If you put up slide 9 there, Simon, there was a Special Powers Act which essentially said if a police officer thinks you're thinking a disloyal thought, he can arrest you. Right. The state had carte blanche to arrest and detain people for as long as they wanted. And that was famously adopted as a model by the South Africans during the apartheid period. In that whole time, not a single Catholic served in the Northern States government until it collapsed 50 years later. As a side note, the Irish left, the revolutionary left, virtually didn't exist apart from tiny handfuls of people in the North. The Communist Party and the Labour Party essentially capitulated to unionism. And this was a very vicious unionism. So Brooke, who became Prime Minister, said, I have not a Roman Catholic about my place. The Labour Minister said, yes, there is one Catholic working in my department, but he's a temp, and we're going to be getting rid of him quite soon. That was the ethos of the place. Now, where are we now? The thing about the big movements in Irish history is they're always connected with what happens internationally. So the United Irishmen in the 18th century, that was under the influence of the French, the American revolutions. The events in '68, that was what was happening in the United States and in France. That movement that opened up in '68 has been defeated. And a movement has been ideologically defeated when it was set up for the express purpose of smashing the state, and now it's the junior partner in an administration with a very right-wing party, the Democratic Unionist Party. Do I think this talk of you can get rid of that slide, Simon? Do I think this talk of unity in the imminent future is justified? Absolutely not. No. Why do we know this? Well. Earlier in the week, Micheál Martin, the Free State Taoiseach, said a referendum over my dead body. Boris Johnson said a referendum over my dead body. Arlene Foster, the DUP leader, said a referendum over my dead body. The numbers are very finely balanced, and the support for Irish unity in the South is, if memory serves, even more flimsy than it is in the North. If you've got a revolutionary state, a counter-revolutionary state, it's inevitable that it's going to have a counter-revolutionary ideology. So the central point of difference I think I have with William is that unionism, loyalism, orangism are explicitly anti-working class reactionary ideologies. Socialists in Ireland and socialists who support the Irish working class have to call it by its right name and accept that no compromise is possible with it. That our demand remains that for a workers' republic. Sorry, that was rather compressed, but I'm sure other comrades will take up some of the themes. I can see one or two I know will be champing at the bit. I'm not going to reply to everything. Just to develop something that Jerry said about the nature of the two ideologies historically and actually at the moment, look at their international points of reference. Republicanism has always identified with what would call progressive causes. So you go to West Belfast, the murals are all about Palestine, the Basque Country, Malcolm X, Black Lives Matter, that type of thing, and has always aligned itself with radical movements internationally. Unionism always takes the wrong side of an argument. Pro-apartheid, more Zionist than many Zionists. The Israeli state is a huge point of reference for it as well. On the evolution of Sinn Fein, I think the first couple of times I voted in elections, I voted for them. I wouldn't dream of doing that now. When you're in a coalition government with a reactionary party of the nature of the Democratic Unionist Party, then that makes you beyond the pale for socialists, as far as I'm concerned. We wouldn't call for a vote for a Social Democratic Party that was going into alliance with the Christian Democrats in Germany, for example. So it has evolved. It's made its peace with partition. It's made its peace with the southern state as well. It's on its march through the institutions, and it's become professionalized. It's become very, very corrupt. I know somebody works in the social housing body in Belfast, and what he tells me is that if you're tight in enough with the Republican leadership in Belfast, you shoot up to the top of the housing list and stuff the family with 3 kids and mold on the bedroom walls. Right. I think for socialists, it's not any longer a legitimate, supportable option, which I think means that as socialists, and this is going on from what Declan says, yes, the Ireland that we are arguing for is a socialist republic, Connolly's phrase, the workers' republic. I think I addressed, though, the point about whether or not the Brits want to remain. Yes, and I think as much as anything now, it's ideological. And I think particularly if Scotland has some sort of soft, hard separation from the British state, clinging on to Wales and the 6 counties are going to take on a huge ideological significance. As for the Ulster Scots thing, my Uncle Charlie that you heard there, if he was still alive today, he would get a grant for being a native Ulster Scots speaker. It's essentially that rural accent from the Belfast hinterland. It's a confection of fairly recent vintage. The loyalism is essentially the ideology of the working class of the urban 6 counties. Okay, I won't take that long. I think there's a threshold for these things. I know I'm desperate to go down to the kitchen and grab a beer. Right, I want to return to something that Kieran raised, which for me is absolutely fascinating, because the period just before partition was that period of the Bolshevik Revolution, the Hungarian Revolution, the German Revolution, the Italian Revolution, and that had an impact in Ireland. Now, all over Europe, comparable workers to those in the Belfast shipyards were joining the communist parties, were putting the question of state power on the agenda. 100 years ago this week, the British state was recruiting militias because it was terrified that the triple alliance of the steel workers, the dockers, the dockers, the transport workers, and the miners were going to take large-scale joint industrial action, and they saw in that the seeds of the British Revolution, right? And the echoes of that in Belfast were very weak indeed. Yes, there were big strikes. There were elements of workers' control, but I think it was Ramsay MacDonald who was in Belfast at various points in the late teens, early 1920s. He made the absolutely accurate observation that anytime the workers come together, the orange drum is banged, and that schism in the class was used by the northern industrial bourgeoisie. So any moments that there were chances for workers' unity, the ideology of Orangism was used to destroy it, and that has happened repeatedly. So the big example that's always given of Belfast workers coming together is the outdoor relief riots in the 1930s. Well, about 2 years after that, when Protestant workers and Catholic workers marched, seized control of parts of the city, loyalists rioted against the police for progressive reasons. The leadership was elements of Belfast republicanism. Within a year or two, that class consciousness had completely evaporated, and there were new pogroms. And right, that's why I keep coming back to this point, that loyalism imposes a huge limit on the class consciousness of many Protestant workers, and it's done very, very deliberately. On issues of sexuality, I mean, that's been a huge change. When I was a student, you could get condoms in Belfast, you couldn't get them on the other side of the border, for example, and the levels of repressive sexual morality were extremely high, more so in the South because the church was so absolutely hegemonic. But even in the North, the Catholic Church had a huge influence. The Protestant denominations, in many respects, were just as puritanical. That influence, I think, has been probably irreversibly shattered. Definitely among Catholics, and definitely among educated Protestants and the Protestant working classes. And so now, the Pride celebrations in Belfast are some of the largest in Europe. And the class consciousness is a contradictory and complex thing. So the last one I was at, the Police Service of Northern Ireland, they'll always be the RUC to me, and the Guards were marching arm in arm at the head of in the parade, and people were applauding the cops. I don't think you would get that in London. But yeah, right, and I think that huge liberalization that we've seen, particularly in Southern society, it is having an impact. There was quite an interesting interview with a long-standing influential DUP member saying that the 26 county state that I grew up loathing doesn't exist anymore. And I think to an extent he's right. The South is transformed beyond all recognition from the theocracy that it was. Let's see. On the question of the federal structure, well, look, the population of the whole country is about 5 million, give or take. So that's half the population of London. I think things like federal structures offer what you might call the Lebanese solution, based on sectarian head counts, patronage dispensed according to religious affiliation, sectarian identity. I think in that particular context, it's not like Australia or the United States. I think it's a very negative idea, because what it's saying is you're not a citizen, you're not a member of a class, you're a member of a religious group. As socialists, we have to reject that absolutely. And frankly, the cultural differences between the North and the South in Ireland, aren't any more significant between, the more prosperous bits of northern Italy and the more rundown bits of Puglia and Sicily. It's a common language. The food's equally bad wherever you go in Ireland, and all that sort of thing. So, I'd be in favor of a unitary state. And, we don't call for a workers' republic because we think it's an easy demand. It's because we think it's a necessary demand, and we situate it in the context of developments in European and international politics. So, and that's the reason I'm agnostic on the question of a referendum. It may happen, it may not happen. The southern bourgeoisie is dead set against it. The unionist bourgeoisie is dead set against it. The British bourgeoisie is dead set against it. I think with that constellation of forces at the moment, it makes it a very improbable outcome.